In the heart of Mesopotamia, a land defined by the great Tigris and Euphrates rivers, a story that would irreversibly shape the destiny of a nation and cast a long shadow across the 20th century, began in the spring of 1937. On April 28th, in the small, sun-scorched village of Halabja, near the ancient city of Tikrit, a boy was born into poverty and obscurity. His mother, Subhatulfa al-Musalat, named him Saddam, an Arabic word meaning one who confronts or one who clashes, a name that would prove hauntingly prophetic. His father Hussein, Abd al-Majid, a landless peasant, had disappeared months before his birth, either dying or abandoning the family, leaving Saddam to enter a world without a paternal figure, a profound disadvantage in the deeply patriarchal society of rural Iraq. His early years were a brutal struggle for survival. His mother soon remarried a man named Ibrahim al-Hassan, who reportedly subjected the young Saddam to relentless abuse and cruelty. Instead of receiving an education, the boy was allegedly forced by his stepfather into a life of petty crime. This formative period, marked by instability, violence, and a lack of affection, forged within him a hardened will, a deep-seated resentment of authority, and an unyielding determination to escape his circumstances. A crucial turning point came around the age of 10, when Saddam fled his abusive home to seek refuge in Baghdad with his maternal uncle, Kerala Talfa. This move was transformative. Talfa, a former army officer and a fervent Arab nationalist, became the father figure Saddam never had. Having been imprisoned for his role in the pro-Axis 1941 Iraqi coup d'etat, Talfa indoctrinated his young nephew with a potent mix of Pan-Arab ideology and a deep-seated suspicion of foreign influence. For the first time, Saddam received a formal education, enrolling in a school in Baghdad. He was immersed in the politically charged atmosphere of the capital, a cauldron of competing ideas in the years following the Second World War. The city was alive with the currents of anti-colonial sentiment and the rising tide of Arab nationalism, which called for the unification of Arab states and the rejection of Western domination. It was in this environment that Saddam was drawn to the nascent Ba'ath Party, an organization whose ideology perfectly mirrored the teachings of his uncle. The Ba'ath Party advocated a powerful blend of Arab nationalism, Pan-Arabism, and socialism, promising to restore Arab greatness through unity and liberation from foreign powers. In 1957, at the age of 20, Saddam formally joined the party, channeling his personal grievances and ambitions into a structured political cause. The political landscape of Iraq was violently upended a year later. In July 1958, the 14th of July Revolution, led by General Abd al-Karim Qasim, overthrew the British-installed Hashemite monarchy. The brutal execution of King Faisal II and his family sent shockwaves through the region and marked the birth of the Republic of Iraq. While initially supported by various factions, including the Baathists, Qasim's leadership soon proved divisive. He promoted an Iraq-first policy that clashed with the Pan-Arab aspirations of the Ba'ath Party and other nationalist groups, who had hoped Iraq would join the newly formed United Arab Republic of Egypt and Syria. Qasim also grew closer to the Iraqi Communist Party, a move that alarmed the Baathists and their nationalist allies. Viewing Qasim as a traitor to the Arab nationalist cause, the Ba'ath Party leadership decided he had to be eliminated. In October 1959, a young and eager Saddam Hussein was chosen to be part of the assassination squad. The attempt was a chaotic failure. As Qasim's car drove through a Baghdad street, the assassins opened fire, killing the driver, but only wounding the prime minister. In the ensuing confusion, Saddam himself was shot in the leg. His role in the failed plot turned him into a fugitive. With a warrant for his arrest, Saddam embarked on a dramatic escape that would become a cornerstone of his personal mythology. He reportedly dug the bullet out of his own leg with a knife, disguised himself as a Bedouin, and fled across the desert. He first found refuge in Damascus, Syria, which was then the center of Ba'athist power as part of the United Arab Republic. From there, he made his way to Cairo, Egypt, the heart of Gamal Abdel Nasser's Pan-Arab movement. This period of exile, lasting until 1963, was not a time of idleness. Saddam finished his secondary education and enrolled in the Cairo University Faculty of Law, all while remaining deeply involved in Ba'ath Party politics, observing the power dynamics of Nasser's regime and honing his own political instincts. Among the community of Iraqi exiles, his chance to return came in February 1963, when the Ba'ath Party, with support from factions within the military, successfully orchestrated a coup known as the Ramadan Revolution. They overthrew and executed Abdi al-Karim Qasim, seizing control of Iraq. Saddam returned from Cairo to a Ba'athist-led nation. But the party's first taste of power was brief, brutal, and chaotic, marked by violent purges against communists and other political opponents. The Ba'athist government alienated many and was itself overthrown in a military coup in November 1963, led by President Abdul Salam Arif. Saddam, who had held a relatively minor position in the short-lived regime, was once again on the losing side. In 1964, he was arrested and imprisoned by the new government. However, his time in prison proved to be another critical period of growth. Far from being broken, he established himself as a dominant figure among the incarcerated Ba'athists, earning respect for his resolve and organizational skills. In 1966, he staged a dramatic escape from prison, further cementing his reputation as a man of action and daring. Upon his return to the political underground, Saddam found the Ba'ath Party shattered and demoralized. He took on a leading role in its reconstruction, focusing his efforts on building a clandestine and highly disciplined internal security apparatus, the Jihaz al-Quds. As deputy secretary of the party's regional command, he meticulously cultivated a network of loyal followers, many from his own Tigriti clan, and purged internal rivals. He was transforming the Ba'ath Party from a collection of ideologues into a formidable and ruthless organization centered on personal loyalty to him. This clandestine work culminated on July 17, 1968, in a carefully planned and bloodless coup. The Ba'ath Party seized power for a second time, while the elder and more respected Ahmed Hassan al-Bakr, a relative of Saddam's, was installed as president and chairman of the Revolutionary Command Council. It was the 31-year-old Saddam Hussein who was the true architect of the takeover. As the new deputy chairman and head of the state's internal security services, he controlled the real levers of power. From the shadows, the boy from the mud hut in Halabja had meticulously positioned himself to become the ultimate authority in Iraq, setting the stage for a reign that would be defined by absolute control, brutal ambition, and unending conflict. With the levers of state security firmly in his grasp, the 1970s became the decade in which Saddam Hussein transformed himself from the shadowy figure behind the throne into the undisputed, absolute ruler of Iraq, while the aging and increasingly frail Ahmed Hassan al-Bakr held the titles of president and chairman. It was his ambitious deputy who wielded true power. Saddam's strategy was twofold. On one hand, to build a modern, prosperous state that could command the loyalty of its people, and on the other, to construct a pervasive security apparatus that would crush any hint of dissent. He moved with cold, calculated precision, understanding that lasting power required not just fear, but also a degree of public consent. His first major step onto the world stage was a bold act of economic nationalism. In 1972, he spearheaded the nationalization of the Iraq Petroleum Company, wresting control of the nation's most precious resource from the Western oil conglomerates that had dominated it for decades. This move, while risky, was a resounding success, instantly elevating his status as a champion of Arab sovereignty against Western imperialism. The timing was impeccable. The 1973 oil crisis, triggered by the Yom Kippur War, caused global oil prices to skyrocket, flooding the Iraqi treasury with unprecedented wealth. This vast oil revenue funded a sweeping and ambitious modernization program that dramatically changed the face of Iraqi society. Saddam's government poured billions into infrastructure projects, building highways, electrifying rural villages, and constructing modern hospitals. A particular focus was placed on education and social welfare. He launched a nationwide campaign to eradicate illiteracy, a program so effective it would later earn an award from UNESCO. Education at all levels, from primary school to university, was made free, as was healthcare. Subsidies for farmers and a rise in public sector employment lifted millions out of poverty. For a significant portion of the Iraqi population, the Ba'athist regime, under Saddam's guidance, delivered tangible improvements to their daily lives, creating a genuine reservoir of support. This period of rapid development, however, was built upon a foundation of terrifying brutality. The same oil wealth that built schools and hospitals also financed one of the most formidable and feared security networks in the Middle East. The Mukhabarat, the secret police, expanded its reach into every corner of Iraqi life. Informants were recruited in government offices, factories, universities, and even within families. The slightest whisper of criticism against the regime could lead to arrest, torture, and disappearance. Political purges were systematic and relentless. The Iraqi Communist Party, which had initially been brought into a national progressive front in a tactical alliance, was brutally suppressed once it had outlived its usefulness. Rival Ba'athist leaders, military officers, and anyone suspected of harboring independent ambitions were systematically eliminated. Simultaneously, Saddam meticulously constructed a pervasive cult of personality. His image became inescapable. Giant portraits and statues depicted him in various guises, as a traditional Bedouin sheikh, a modern statesman in a Western suit, a devout Muslim at prayer, and a military commander-in-chief. State-controlled media, the only media permitted, broadcast endless praise, portraying him as the wise and benevolent father of the nation, the heir to ancient Mesopotamian kings like Nebuchadnezzar. History books were rewritten to exaggerate his role in the party's history, fabricating a heroic narrative that began with his legendary escape from the 1959 assassination attempt. This relentless propaganda sought to fuse his personal identity with that of the Iraqi nation itself, making any opposition to him an act of treason against the country. By the late 1970s, President al-Bakr was president in name only. The final act of Saddam's ascent came in 1979, a year of profound upheaval in the region. A proposed unification treaty with Ba'athist Syria threatened to dilute Saddam's power. As the Syrian president, Hafez al-Assad would have likely become the deputy leader in a unified state. Saddam moved decisively to scuttle the plan and remove the final obstacle to his absolute authority. On July 16, 1979, he forced the ailing al-Bakr to resign, citing health reasons. Saddam Hussein was now officially president of Iraq, chairman of the Revolutionary Command Council, and supreme commander of the armed forces. He wasted no time in demonstrating the nature of his rule. On July 22, less than a week after taking power, he convened an assembly of senior Ba'ath Party officials. In a chilling spectacle, captured on film and later broadcast to the nation, Saddam took the stage and announced the discovery of a fifth column and a treasonous plot within the party's leadership. A terrified party official, Mohi Abdel Hussein Mashadi, was brought forward to deliver a forced confession, implicating dozens of his colleagues in the room. As he read out the names from a list, security guards grabbed the accused, one by one, and dragged them away amidst shouts and tears. Over 60 high-ranking officials were implicated. To ensure the complete complicity of the remaining leadership, Saddam declared that they would form the firing squads themselves. In the days that followed, 22 of the most senior officials, men who had been his comrades for years, were executed, some reportedly by the hands of their former colleagues. The message was unequivocal. There was no room for dissent, no loyalty but to Saddam, and the price for disloyalty was death. This brutal purge consolidated his power absolutely, creating a regime built on terror, where even the highest echelons of power were not safe. As Saddam cemented his rule, the geopolitical landscape of the Middle East was dramatically altered by the Iranian Islamic Revolution in February 1979. The fall of the Shah and the rise of the fiercely anti-Western, revolutionary Shia cleric, Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini, sent shockwaves across the region. For Saddam, a Sunni leader ruling a majority Shia country, the revolution posed a direct existential threat. Khomeini openly called for the overthrow of the atheist, Ba'athist regime in Baghdad, and sought to export his Islamic revolution across the Muslim world. The two leaders shared a deep personal animosity. Saddam had expelled Khomeini from his long exile in Iraq in 1978 at the Shah's request. Saddam saw Iran, now in the throes of revolutionary chaos and diplomatically isolated from the West, as a vulnerable target. He envisioned a swift, decisive war that would not only neutralize the threat from Khomeini, but also allow Iraq to seize the oil-rich Iranian province of Khuzestan and establish itself as the undisputed dominant power in the Persian Gulf. This ambition led him to unilaterally abrogate the 1975 Algiers Agreement, a treaty he himself had signed that had settled a long-standing border dispute by granting Iran partial sovereignty over the crucial Shat al-Arab waterway. Reclaiming full control of the waterway became his public justification for war. Encouraged by other Arab Gulf states, fearful of Iran's revolutionary fervor and receiving tacit support from Western powers, who now viewed him as a strategic bulwark against a radicalized Iran, Saddam made his final, fateful decision. On September 22, 1980, Iraqi forces launched a full-scale invasion of Iran, expecting a rapid victory. The man who had spent a decade masterfully consolidating his power at home now plunged his nation and the entire region into a brutal and devastating 8-year war. A conflict that would bleed both nations dry and set the stage for decades of instability to come. The invasion of Iran on September 22, 1980, was predicated on a fatal miscalculation. Saddam Hussein, believing the neighboring nation was critically weakened by its own revolutionary chaos, anticipated a swift and decisive victory, a modern-day blitzkrieg that would seize vital territory and establish Iraq as the preeminent power in the Persian Gulf. The initial Iraqi advance saw some success, capturing the port city of Khorramshahr after a bloody battle. But the lightning victory Saddam had envisioned never materialized. Instead of collapsing, the Iranian Revolution galvanized the population. The war quickly devolved into a brutal, static conflict, a nightmarish echo of the First World War's trench warfare. For 8 agonizing years, the two nations bled each other, white along a vast and desolate front. Iran, with its much larger population, responded to Iraq's superior weaponry with human wave attacks, sending tens of thousands of often poorly trained volunteers, including child soldiers, to their deaths clearing minefields and overwhelming Iraqi positions. The conflict escalated in scope and brutality. The War of the Cities saw both sides launch devastating missile attacks on civilian population centers, while the tanker war disrupted global oil shipping as both Iran and Iraq targeted each other. Soil tankers and maritime facilities in the Persian Gulf, facing the prospect of being overwhelmed by Iran's demographic advantage, Saddam's regime resorted to the most horrific of measures: chemical warfare. Iraqi forces systematically deployed mustard gas and nerve agents like sarin and tabun against Iranian troops, a blatant violation of international law that nonetheless drew a muted response from a world more colony containing Khomeini's Iran. The international community, including the Soviet Union, France, and other Western powers, provided Saddam with weapons, intelligence, and financial support, viewing his secular dictatorship as a preferable alternative to a radical Islamic republic. The United States, while officially neutral, provided battlefield intelligence to Iraq. This horrific policy of chemical warfare was not limited to foreign enemies. Saddam turned these weapons on his own people in a campaign of genocidal intent against Iraq's Kurdish population, who he accused of siding with Iran. The campaign, known as the Anfal, which began in 1986, saw the systematic destruction of thousands of Kurdish villages and the murder of tens of thousands of civilians. Its most infamous event occurred on March 16, 1988, when Iraqi jets dropped a cocktail of chemical agents on the Kurdish city of Halabja, killing an estimated 5,000 men, women, and children in a single afternoon. By 1988, with both nations utterly exhausted and their economies in ruins after a conflict that had claimed an estimated 1 million lives, Iran finally accepted a ceasefire brokered by the United Nations. The war ended in a bloody stalemate, with no territorial changes and no victor, leaving Iraq triumphant in its survival. But saddled with a colossal war debt, estimated to be over $80 billion, Saddam Hussein emerged from the war not humbled, but with a messianic sense of his own destiny. He possessed one of the largest and most battle-hardened armies in the world, and saw himself as the leader of the Arab world. A modern Saladin, yet his treasury was empty, and the nation needed rebuilding. He turned his gaze south, toward the small, oil-rich emirate of Kuwait. He accused Kuwait of waging economic warfare by overproducing oil, thus driving down prices, and of stealing Iraqi oil through slant drilling along their disputed border. He also demanded that Kuwait, along with Saudi Arabia, forgive the massive loans they had provided him to fight Iran, a war he argued he had fought on behalf of all Arabs. When his demands and threats were not met, he made another catastrophic miscalculation. Believing the Arab world would stand by him and that the United States would not intervene, he ordered his forces to invade. On August 2, 1990, the Iraqi army swiftly overran Kuwait, and Saddam declared it the 19th province of Iraq. This time, however, the world's response was not muted. The invasion was a clear violation of international sovereignty, and it threatened global oil supplies. The United Nations Security Council passed a series of resolutions condemning the invasion and imposing crippling economic sanctions. The United States, under President George H.W. Bush, orchestrated a massive international coalition of 35 countries, deploying hundreds of thousands of troops to Saudi Arabia in an operation dubbed Desert Shield. When Saddam defied the UN's deadline to withdraw, Operation Desert Storm was launched on January 17, 1991. The ensuing 6-week conflict was a showcase of overwhelming technological superiority. The coalition's air campaign decimated Iraq's military infrastructure, command and control systems, and demoralized its army. The ground war, when it came, lasted a mere 100 hours. The vaunted Iraqi Republican Guard was routed, and coalition forces liberated Kuwait. As his defeated army retreated, they set hundreds of Kuwaiti oil wells ablaze, creating an environmental catastrophe. Yet, the coalition's mandate was limited to liberating Kuwait, not overthrowing Saddam's regime. The war ended with Saddam militarily defeated, but still firmly in power. Encouraged by American broadcasts to rise up, massive rebellions erupted among the Shia in southern Iraq and the Kurds in the north. Saddam, his elite Republican Guard units having survived the war largely intact, turned his remaining military might against the uprisings with unrestrained savagery. His helicopter, gunships, and tanks crushed the poorly armed rebels, slaughtering tens of thousands and creating a massive refugee crisis. In response, the coalition established no-fly zones over northern and southern Iraq to protect the populations from his air force, a measure that would remain in place for the next decade. The 1990s became a long, grim period of isolation and suffering for Iraq. The UN sanctions, intended to force Saddam to dismantle his weapons programs and comply with international law, remained in place, devastating the Iraqi economy. The country's infrastructure, shattered by the war, could not be rebuilt. A humanitarian crisis unfolded as malnutrition and disease became rampant, with shortages of medicine and clean water leading to a dramatic rise in child mortality. The UN implemented the Oil for Food program, which allowed Iraq to sell a limited amount of oil to purchase essential humanitarian supplies. But it was rife with corruption and did little to alleviate the suffering of the general population, while Saddam's regime manipulated the system to its advantage. Throughout this period, Saddam played a relentless cat-and-mouse game with unweapons inspectors, UNSCOM, who were tasked with finding and destroying his weapons of mass destruction, including the chemical and biological agents he was known to possess. He engaged in a pattern of obstruction, concealment, and feigned cooperation, leading to repeated crises that kept the region on edge. By the end of the decade, he had effectively forced the inspectors out, leaving the world to wonder what, if any, weapons he still possessed. He remained defiant, a pariah on the world stage, ruling over a shattered and impoverished nation. The terrorist attacks of September 11, 2001, fundamentally altered the political calculus in Washington. Though there was no credible evidence linking Saddam Hussein to the attacks, the administration of President George W. Bush designated his regime as part of an axis of evil and argued that the risk of a state sponsor of terrorism possessing weapons of mass destruction was intolerable in a post-9/11 world. The U.S. and its primary ally, the United Kingdom, began to build a case for a preemptive invasion, accusing Saddam of hiding WMDs and harboring terrorists. Despite the return of uninspectors under a new mandate in late 2002, who found no conclusive evidence of active weapons programs, the momentum for war was unstoppable. On March 20, 2003, the U.S.-led coalition launched its invasion of Iraq. The Iraqi army, hollowed out by more than a decade of sanctions and neglect, offered little effective resistance. In less than 3 weeks, coalition forces were in the heart of Baghdad. On April 9, 2003, the world watched as a giant statue of Saddam in Firdos Square was pulled down, a symbolic end to his 24-year reign of terror. As his regime collapsed, Saddam himself vanished. For 8 months, he was the most wanted man on the planet, the ace of spades in the coalition's deck of playing cards. A massive manhunt culminated on December 13, 2003, when U.S. forces acting on a tip found him not in a palace or a military bunker, but hiding in a cramped, dark underground hole, a spider hole, on a farm near his hometown of Tikrit. Disheveled and disoriented, the man who had once commanded absolute power was captured without firing a shot. His final chapter played out not in a battlefield but in a courtroom. Handed over to the new Iraqi government, Saddam Hussein was put on trial before the Iraqi Special Tribunal. The first trial, which began in October 2005, focused on his role in the 1982 massacre of 148 Shia men and boys from the town of Dujail, a reprisal for a failed assassination attempt against him. Throughout the televised proceedings, he was by turns defiant, contemptuous, and theatrical, challenging the court's legitimacy and attempting to portray himself as the legitimate president of Iraq, defending his nation from Iranian and American aggression. On November 5, 2006, he was found guilty of crimes against humanity and sentenced to death. After a failed appeal, the sentence was carried out. In the pre-dawn hours of December 30, 2006, the first day of the Muslim holiday of Eid al-Adha, Saddam Hussein was executed by hanging. Cell phone footage of the execution, showing him being taunted by his Shia guards in his final moments, was leaked, underscoring the deep sectarian hatreds his rule had both exploited and exacerbated. The legacy of Saddam Hussein is one of profound and lasting devastation. His pursuit of absolute power, fueled by paranoia and grandiose ambition, led him to wage devastating wars that killed over 1 million people and bankrupted his nation. His brutal policies of internal repression, including the Anfal genocide and the suppression of the 1991 uprisings, shattered the country's social fabric, institutionalizing a culture of fear and deepening sectarian fault lines between Sunni, Shia, and Kurd. The power vacuum left by his violent overthrow plunged Iraq into a horrific cycle of insurgency, civil war, and became a breeding ground for extremist groups like ISIS. He left behind a country traumatized by decades of violence, a region haunted by instability, and a world still grappling with the catastrophic consequences of his long and bloody reign. The story that began in a mud hut in Halabja ended on a gallows in Baghdad. A tragic and violent arc that left an indelible scar on the history of the 20th century.